Hey, this is Pete Sampson of The Independent. We've got a special show today, a little bit different than our usual format. On Wednesday night, Matt and I got together at ESQ Clothing in downtown Chicago. Thanks to Notre Dame alumnus Go Wang for putting on the event for a live recording, Q&A with Notre Dame fans. And then the back half of the show, we have a interview with Karels, who covers Texas A&M for the 24/7 Sports Network. So all the insight on A&M's roster and what to keep an eye out for in College Station on Saturday night, plus where to visit and where to eat in College Station if you're lucky enough to make the trip down to Texas. So with that said, let's get to the show. Welcome to the latest episode of The Independent. I'm Pete Sampson in Chicago with Matt Fortuna, also in Chicago, and we're thrilled to be hosted for another year by Go Wang at ESQ Clothing, downtown Chicago, one of our favorite sponsors that make us look almost like Marcus Freeman, but not quite. So this episode, we did our season preview that posted earlier in the week where we had Tony Simeone from the Notre Dame Radio Network to talk about the season. And this, since it's live, we're in person together, we thought this would be more of a good Q&A. So if you've got a question about Notre Dame football, shout it out. No question too stupid. We asked many of Notre Dame football coaches and players ourselves. So, yeah, we can go ahead started with the Q&A portion of the show. So what do you guys want to talk about as far as Notre Dame football heading into 2024? Don't be shy.
I think one of the big questions, last year we had an awesome addition. Sam Hartman joined the team as a transfer portal quarterback. He was built up quite a bit by everybody, and then started the season hot, and then maybe didn't go according to plan the rest of the way. We brought in another high-profile QB this year. What's the take on Riley this season? Is it going to be a little bit more of what we saw from Sam Hartman, or do you think we might see something a little bit different, and what do you think the chances of success are going to be with that?
I think it'll be different, provided he's healthy. Obviously, it stunk to not have him around for a full spring with an entirely new offensive cast, a new offense coordinator. But everything you hear about the guy in and around campus, and even his background, Pete handed him a New York Times with a great story written by Pete today. He went down to Alabama, to his hometown, and talked to a lot of people around him. And it sounds like he's about as Notre Dame of a kid as you can get for someone from that part of the country, if that makes sense. I mean, he really loves the place, and he definitely seems like one of the guys. Not to say Sam wasn't, but he was 24 years old. Like, that's after this year, when all the COVID guys are gone, I think we'll see college football return a little bit more to normalcy. And to have a dual threat guy like that with a new offense coordinator who's been there and done that, I think is very, very valuable. We've heard Marcus Freeman say we didn't always put Sam Hartman in the best position to succeed last year. I think a lot of that indirectly is on Jared Parker, not necessarily his fault, but that was not the OC that Hartman had initially signed on to play for at Notre Dame. So provided Leonard is healthy, I think things will be much smoother this time around.
And I think that the receiving core is so much better. I mean, that was when we had to sit down with Marcus in the summer, and I was like, hey, tell me what something you learned from the Sam Hartman experience that is going to make it better for Riley Leonard. And he's like, yeah, he didn't want to like throw Sam under the bus, but he also was like, look, we didn't put him in the best positions to be successful all the time. I mean, you think about the Duke game last year where they had 3 healthy scholarship receivers going into the game. One of them is at Cal now, another one's at Virginia, another one's at UCLA. One of them was a freshman, the other one was a sophomore who never really did anything, and then Chris Tyree was the senior who was actually productive. So, like, I hate to say like it couldn't be any worse, but like it would be hard to have a worse receiving core at Notre Dame than what they had sort of at the end of September, early October last year. And I mean, I agree with Matt. It just like Leonard feels much more like one of the guys than Hartman ever did. And I feel like Hartman came to Notre Dame in a lot of ways to elevate himself, which worked out great because, for what he was or was not as a football player, he turned into kind of a celebrity. You don't do that at Wake Forest, even if you have the same hair. For Riley Leonard,
he's a lot closer to us at Wake than he was now.
Yeah, like Riley Leonard, I think is much more about Notre Dame. And like when you spend time with them, it can come off as like a little thick sometimes, but I think that like it is authentic at the same time. I think he is about Notre Dame. He references his great grandfather all the time, who played in the 40s. When I sat down and talked with him in the summer, he even said like, "Look,
I would have come here the first time, but I wasn't good enough. Like, I get it. But I think a place like Notre Dame and like how faith forward he is like, I think meshes really well with what Notre Dame is about too. Like, he's comfortable in that part of it. So I think overall, like, I'm not going to get carried away like I did with Sam Hartman last year, especially after the first 4 games. You're like, holy shit, this guy's going to win the Heisman Trophy. And it's like, wait a minute, they played Central Michigan and Tennessee State, Navy, and it's like, wait, okay. But I think Riley Leonard, whatever happens on Saturday night, is going to be a very, very good college football player for Notre Dame this year, and the kind of a guy that you can build, a playoff level offense around eventually. Maybe not in game 1, but I think that they will get there by the end of the season.
I wanted to actually ask a question to you because you had a story, I think, this week earlier on the receiving corps. You had a line at the end that really caught my attention. It said, Rico Flores told the Notre Dame staff on his way out, I want to go somewhere where I can win the Blitnikoff Award. Good on him for having the stones to say that. But did that really happen? And like,
it did really happen. Because I talked to the coach that he told it to.
Okay.
I just think like last year's, it felt a little disjointed. Matt referenced the hiring of Jared Parker. That was very messy. And I think that even with Sam Hartman, they got off on the wrong foot. It was very difficult to sort of get that back into a good spot. Then the receivers get hurt. And by the end of the year, I think when Marcus Freeman comes on the day after Stanford and says, I want the entire coaching staff back, and then 24 hours later fires the receivers coach, you're like, something is a little off here. So I think with Denbrock, one of the big benefits of him, there are many, but one is like he's run and commanded a room before. Like, there's not going to be any confusion about who the boss is on offense. And I think last year there was like, they were collaborative to a fault. And this year I think that they're going to have much more of a chain of command from Denbrock on down of guys like Gino Guidugli and Mike Brown. They've worked together before at Cincinnati. So I think you sort of get ahead in that way too. So overall, I don't know if any receivers will come into the coaching room and say like, I want to win the Biletnikoff Award. This is why I'm leaving. I think they're a lot more realistic this year.
Speaking of coordinators, the transfer portal gets most of the attention in the offseason, but the coaching carousel seems wild as it's ever been. Chip Kelly taking a step back, right, to be an offensive coordinator. That Denbrock Golden's on an extension. How sure can we be that we can get them committed to the long term, or them maybe getting the itch to go head coaching route?
First off, nice shirt. I think that's ESQ, right? I have the same one, different color at home. I think it's as good of a spot as you can be in. Like, I don't want to speak for anyone and say Mike Denbrock doesn't have head coaching aspirations, because I'm sure in the back of his mind or heart he does. But he's a guy who's at a stage of his career where he seems to be very content with what he's about and about the work much more than titles. I mean, they put for both these guys 4 years, $9 million contracts in front of Golden and Denbrock. I know it was a different era, so to speak, in college football, but they let Mike Elko walk out the door after 1 year at A&M because they were giving him maybe 2 at the time, which again was very big at the time, but it was like, we're not going to pay that. Now it's, what do you need? And so I think Notre Dame has adapted very well to the modern college football environment in that regard. And they've got guys who want to be there. Obviously, Denbrock is not looking to leave. Last time he left, he was demoted. And so we let him become a play caller again at Cincinnati. In Golden's case, I believe his family's now in South Bend from Cincinnati. His son had just finished up his senior year of high school football out there. So, he's been there and done that as well. I'm not saying he doesn't want to be a head coach one day, but I think he's another guy who has already scratched that itch, so to speak, and is very happy working at a place where you've got smart kids for the most part. This year, at least, you've got really old kids who can speak your language, understand your language, and it makes for about as smooth of a college football environment as you can get.
Yeah, I would say Denbrock in particular, like I've asked him like head coaching aspirations, and he's like, I'd be lying if I didn't think about it sometimes, but it's like, it's kind of a young man's game now. I think the way the sport has trended, you're seeing a lot more hires like Marcus Freeman, who sort of like are culture setters opposed to like these sort of grizzled tactician type coaches. Golden, I think I've always been like harder to nail down, but like, I was told that the University of Cincinnati reached out a couple of years ago when they had an opening. He's like, I don't need to talk to you. I'm not interested. I think that maybe if the right NFL job came calling, like as a defensive coordinator there, that would be intriguing to him. But I would almost say like, I think Syracuse, and was Boston College involved with him at all?
Al Washing was the runner-up for BC. He went there, but I don't know if he was involved.
Then Matt brought up a good point with his family sort of relocating to South Bend. Finally, it would stranger things have happened in coaching moves, but like that would make it more likely that somebody would stay than not. But I'd say like Denbrock, you're good for a while. Golden, I guess we'll sort of see. I think after this year, the way I had a story on The Athletic today just about like Watts, Mills, Cross, Kaiser all coming back together, and like you don't get that every year. Like the defense is going to be a rebuild of some kind next season because they just couldn't be any older than they are right now. But that'll be interesting to sort of see how Golden like, all right, do I want to take this on or am I looking for maybe the next thing?
I will say in the Golden's case, like he's already stayed 2 years longer than I thought he would. Like that was I wouldn't say questionable hire, but definitely a curious hire when it was made because our last taste of Al Golden at the college level was not all that successful. But to see him come after the Super Bowl Cincinnati and just really assimilate himself really, really well with Notre Dame, I think has been impressive. I did not think that defense was going to be as dominant last year as they were. And this year, I think they have the chance to be one of the best in the country, if not the best.
With this game coming up from a micro perspective on just this game, what areas or what position groups do you feel the most confident about? What do you feel the least confident about going into that?
Least is pretty easy to answer. Yeah, it's like Notre Dame's offensive line returned 6 career starts in their starting lineup. They'll start a true freshman at left tackle, redshirt freshman at left guard, junior at center, junior at right guard, and then a junior at left guard. So I think it's the first time. I know it's the first time they haven't had at least one fifth-year senior in the starting lineup since 2016. We don't need to revisit that season. I haven't gone back to figure out the last time they didn't start a senior at all. But I might be looking for a very, very long time before I found a Notre Dame offensive line that didn't have that. So that I don't think it is possible to sort of undersell how concerning the offensive line is going into Kyle Field. Like if they were opening at home against Northern Illinois, I think they would still have a lot to work out. On the road at A&M, I think you have to adjust your game plan accordingly. That would be advice to bet the under if you can. I would say but I also was like I don't like Notre Dame's defense is so old and so experienced. Third year without Golden, I have a very difficult time seeing A&M move the ball on them. Like I think this defense has a chance to be better than it was last year when they finished first in the country in pass efficiency defense, and I think they were top 5 in scoring or top 10 in scoring. So it's I believe in Notre Dame's defense with a high amount of faith. I have absolutely no idea what the offensive line is going to look like, and how Denbrock manages that on Saturday night is going to be pretty fascinating to me.
Yeah, I'm with Pete. I think it's the second time they started a true freshman at left tackle in the first game. I believe it's the first time they've started. Well, definitely be the first time they started a redshirt freshman next to him at left guard. 6 career starts on the first team. Ironically enough, and if you're looking for a silver lining or like a reason for optimism with this line, the second team unit, according to the depth chart they put out this week, if you added up all the starts, I believe are 26. Like there's a lot more experience behind them than there is in front of them, which means these guys did do something to earn these jobs. Now, clearly the first teamers probably did some stuff to lose those jobs, but coaches speak a lot about the meaning of practice and the importance of practice, and a lot of times they've got their minds already made up. Clearly, like they took these last 3 and 4 weeks seriously during camp. Marcus Freeman, Joe Rudolph trusted their eyes and were going with the guys who performed the best during that stretch. And I think that's a positive sign. I can't remember the depth of this program being in the position it is right now on both sides of the ball. And to take that analogy another step further, I mean, Rod Hurd did not transfer from Northwestern for a 6-year college football to be a backup. And he's starting out as a backup because Adon Schuler, really is only redshirt freshman, right? Beat him out in camp, which is another surprise. So they're not taking any chances as coaching staff with this roster. They're trusting their eyes. They're trusting their evaluation. And if they believe that these guys, based on what they've seen in practice, are good enough to start at A&M, that could be reason for optimism. Now, it's still the weakest position offensive line on the team right now. Probably the worst matchup-wise going up against this A&M front. But that's definitely where I'd have the most cause for concern.
Did advantage or disadvantage Notre Dame with potential weather forecast? A little early, but pretty rainy.
Yeah, I think I was on like a Texas radio show Tuesday, and they're like, "How much do you think Notre Dame's going to get hurt by the weather?" I'm like, "Actually, it's quite a bit hotter in South Bend than it is in College Station." So I don't, it's like If it rains, I don't think that helps one team more than another. But I think the fact that it's not a noon kickoff and it's 105 degrees is good for Notre Dame. Last time I checked, I think the high was 90 degrees on Saturday. You got an evening kickoff. I mean, I think back to when Notre Dame opened at Texas in 2016 and how hot that was down there. And I think Notre Dame tried to get through that game playing like 6 different defensive linemen in a double overtime game, which was a terrible, terrible idea. This year, they go down there with probably 8 or 9 defensive linemen who can play. So I think even the way Notre Dame is built in the defensive trenches, at least, would suit a warm weather game where you can rotate a lot and not feel like you have a huge drop off. But one of my big questions is like, how healthy is Howard Cross going into the game? He had a hamstring in camp. Can you get 25 great snaps out of him, or 35 or 45? Like 10 more snaps of really good Howard Cross or 20 more snaps of really good Howard Cross could make a significant difference in a game that I think is going to be pretty tight.
I'm more concerned if it's raining the whole game for off.
Yeah, it's not good. That's not a good thing for an offense, but it's like, I don't know if it's any worse for Notre Dame than it is for A&M. But how a quarterback making his first start at Notre Dame handles the zone read with running backs he's never played with and receivers he's never thrown to, like, that could be a little bit dicey. However, Mike Denbrock was the offensive coordinator in 2016 when they went to North Carolina State, and I think he got overruled by Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly's not there to overrule him this time. It's a monster.
I thought you were going to ask your concern with your tailgate, because that would be a concern of mine if I were tailgating this game. It's hard to say one would have a definitive edge. I will say, first game under a new coach, if you're A&M, you're probably not going to be able to like leave it all out there and try all these tricks that you want to do and really get that crowd into it the way you always see them get that kind of boost. So I guess I would say the advantage goes to Notre Dame there. But the way both these teams are built, I think it's going to be a low-scoring game either way.
The college football season is back, and we're thrilled to keep our partnership going with Roback on The Independent. You've probably seen their new licensed line of Notre Dame apparel, hoodie, quarter zip, polos, and how they partnered with Riley Leonard and Benjamin Morrison. You can get all that gear plus everything else on Roback.com for 20% off with the promo code IRISH. That's all your Notre Dame gear for tailgating, game day, and however else you want to get outside. For 20% off, just visit Roback.com and use promo code IRISH.
Pleased to welcome in Carter Karels, maybe a familiar name for Notre Dame fans since he Texas A&M graduated in 18, covered Notre Dame, then on to Florida State, now Texas A&M, sort of moving through the hierarchy of fanatical and slightly unhinged fan bases. Now covering Texas A&M for 24/7 Sports. Carter, thanks for making some time for us on the Independence. Good to see you after a few years. And I guess just this, you mentioned sort of before we hit record, this is a bit of your personal journalistic Super Bowl. What are you feeling about this week as Notre Dame comes down to your backyard?
Yeah, I can't wait. Going to be cool to see everybody again. And I don't know if it's my Super Bowl, if it's Mike Elko's Super Bowl, maybe it's Riley Leonard's Super Bowl. Like, there's so many cool storylines with this game, with the connections between Riley Leonard and Mike Elko, and just how similar these teams are. I keep saying this game's going to be 9-6 with these two defenses and two offenses that have a lot of questions. So, looking forward to this one.
Carter, what's the buzz excitement like down there in College Station? I know this is old hat in some ways for Notre Dame fans because every game's a non-conference game, but I feel like when they're going, particularly to another part of the country, there's a different kind of energy than I imagine it is for a traditional SEC or Big 12 opponent. What's the atmosphere like there in anticipation of this game?
Yeah, it probably took a little longer than anticipated because, coming out of last season, this is a fan base that was pretty dejected. They had a lot of high hopes under Jimbo Fisher, ended pretty horribly there. And so I think, they get Mike Elko, at first they kind of thinking, did we settle for this guy? We didn't get a Kalen DeBoer, a Dan Lanning. We got a guy who's a coach at Duke. There was kind of this entitled perspective on it. And then, you know, Mike Elko came in and retained a lot of the top guys on the roster, brought in a really good transfer portal class, and kind of said all the right things this offseason. And just as the offseason's kind of aged for him, I think this fan base has kind of rallied around him and kind of changed their tune. And now going into this game, they're looking at it and saying, hey, you win this game. And man, what a season it kind of sets up for season one under Mike Elko. And, you know, Notre Dame's kind of similar too, right? They win this game. And I mean, they really got like a 3-game schedule this year. So you win this game and you're probably in the playoff, right? So I think both fan bases look at the opportunity of, you know, obviously a ranked matchup, obviously 105,000 in the stadium, going to be a lot of fun, but the college football playoff implications are going to be immediately there in this game. So it'll make it even more fun.
I was interested, like, how you feel like A&M fits together as, like, they're kind of a portal team this offseason. They had a ton of outgoings and a ton of incomings. What were the outgoings that you think hurt them the most, and who are the incomings that you think may impact this season the most for the Aggies?
Yeah, outgoings. There were two that really hurt, and that was Evan Stewart, wide receiver, went to Oregon. You know, you look at this wide receiver core right now. Do they have a number one receiver? Do they have a guy who can have 1,000 yards in a season? I don't think so. And you look at the offense that Evan Stewart's joining in Oregon. If he can kind of put it together across the whole season, that's a kid that, you know, the sky's the limit. Walter Nolan, another one, defensive tackle, went to Ole Miss, one of the top players in his class in 2022 and in the – and you know, you look up front for A&M, very impressive defense. There was one question. It's kind of, you know, the run defense, you know, replacing Walter Nolan, replacing McKinley Jackson, Edgerrin Cooper, consensus All-American linebacker from last year. There's kind of a void to fill in that run defense, and they're lacking sort of that big body guy, right? You got Shamar Turner, but he's more of that 290, 300-pound guy. They're kind of lacking that 320-pound guy who can really plug the middle, and I think Walter Nolan was that. LT Overton was another top contributor for the team, went to Alabama, certainly should make an impact there. Outside of that, though, I don't think they felt like they lost a whole lot to the transfer portal. Obviously, the numbers would suggest otherwise, but from an impact standpoint, really only a few there that are going to be big misses. And likewise with the incoming transfers, you know, you bring in a 25 transfer class, you can't expect all of them to contribute. You know, half of them probably won't even play very much. But the top of the class is what you want to talk about here. Nick Scorton being kind of the headliner out of Purdue, led the Big Ten in sacks, second team All SEC, is a kind of a hometown product out of Bryan High School. And they feel like this is, you know, a first round pick in 2025 and could really anchor this defense. Cassius Howell is another guy to mention out of Bowling Green, led the MAC in sacks last year, and he's probably not even going to start. That's how good this defensive line can be. Armaj Reed Adams on the offensive line out of Kansas. He's someone A&M's thought pretty highly of this offseason, has the versatility to play right guard or right tackle. A few other names to mention, but really the one other key area I want to highlight is the secondary, because a lot of change from last year. 10 newcomers for the group, 7 out of the transfer portal. I think if you looked at that group last year, man, I mean, Pete could have had 9 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown against that group. They needed a lot of change. And did they get any superstars? I don't think so. But did they tremendously improve the group? I do think so. And with that defensive line helping them out, I think it's a group that can hold their own for the most part and not be as glaring of a weakness as they were last year. So I think top to bottom, they filled a lot of the holes on the roster. They improved their depth. But the biggest one for sure is Nick Scorton, and he's certainly a name to know for Notre Dame.
Carter, 55 total newcomers on this A&M roster heading into week 1 from last year. Obviously, the headliner among the freshmen is Terry Bussey, the 5-star athlete. I believe he's listed as kick returner on the depth chart. Everything we've read and heard coming out of the last month is he could be a receiver, he could be a corner. How do you expect A&M to deploy him in week 1?
Yeah, it could be something where, week 1, I don't know if the trust will fully be there because, he arrived in June. It wasn't like he was an early enrollee. And for the first half of camp, he was working at cornerback before he moved to offense. So could be a tall ask, but from everything I heard, had an incredible second scrimmage for the Aggies a couple weeks ago in preseason camp, and could be kind of building more trust and with where they're at with their skill positions, right? Have some questions at receiver, have some depth concerns at running back. I think he's your guy that, will he have a ton of yards year 1? Maybe not, but could be a guy that they use kind of as a gadget player in certain situations. A name you hear is like Kadarius Toney, right? Could he be used in jet sweeps and motions and just kind of be that guy that can be used in a lot of different ways? I think, again, game 1 against Notre Dame, does that happen? Does he have 5 plays on offense? We'll see. But from a kick returning standpoint, he's going to be the guy back there at kickoff and at punt. And I think he has the potential to be a special kick returner. So even if he's not too involved with offense, I think he's a name to know because the first scrimmage that he had for Texas A&M, he returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown. And it wasn't quite Kyle Hamilton 3 picks like we saw in 2019. That was crazy, that first camp, that first practice we saw of him. But he's definitely kind of got that similar fascination behind him where it's like, hey, this could be the guy that could really rejuvenate a group that needs it. So, again, will he play a ton offensively? I'm not sure, but definitely one to know about.
Can you explain how good Connor Wegman is or is not quite yet? Because he's somebody that pops up in even sort of in a first round, projection, like a top 30 overall player. Statistically, though, like you just take the Miami and Auburn games last year, like he's good, but maybe not great. So, like, what kind of quarterback does A&M have? Do you have much of a sense of like, where his game needs to go next? Like, because I feel like their games might not be similar, but Leonard and Wigman both, sort of out at midseason, but both sort of have some like draft shine going into the season.
Yeah, it's interesting. ESPN, The Athletic, but both of them see him as a first round pick. I think a lot of it is potential, right? 5-star recruit. There have been games. I mean, you look back at his true freshman season. You look back at the LSU game he had where Brian Kelly and LSU were hopeful to make the playoff, and they kind of spoiled those chances. The Ole Miss game when he came in, that was an A&M roster and team that was in shambles, and he put together 2 great games against 2 great teams. Last year, Miami, I think he had a good game. Auburn was definitely the game where he struggled, but so a lot of it's projection. But I think for Connor Wigman, the strength, it's a couple things, right? I think he takes care of the football. Only had 2 picks in his career so far. And he also has a really good pocket presence and ability to extend plays and avoid sacks. This is not a guy who is going to rack up a ton of rushing yards on you, but he's athletic enough, he's quick enough to, move around in the pocket and former shortstop, could have played college baseball for the Aggies if he wanted to. Someone who can kind of release it at different angles and use different arm slots. And so definitely gifted as a passer from that standpoint. But last year before he went down was, I believe, according to PFF, the most pressured quarterback in college football. And I want to say he only took 1 or 2 sacks at that point. He really had this great ability to avoid sacks, extend plays. I think maybe where his game needs to take the next step beyond just staying healthy, because obviously injuries have been a concern for him since high school. maybe with that deep ball, just getting a little bit more of his timing. We've seen it on some deep posts. We've seen it on some, deeper routes where he's throwing it a little bit late, that the anticipation is quite not there. Certainly he's had some good deep balls in his time at A&M, but just consistently, I think that's maybe been an issue. And when you're playing an elite secondary like Notre Dame, that timing, that, 0.3 second difference can be the difference between a touchdown or an interception. So I think that'll be something to watch in this game. Can he have that timing, especially after, in the spring, he came off a pretty significant injury last September where he had to have surgery, had that broken bone in his foot, and he decided, hey, I'm going to play the whole spring, but he wasn't really himself. He was, limping around. He couldn't really put weight on his, he could put weight on his foot, but he couldn't quite plant it. His accuracy was off. I think for him, he felt, hey, I just got to be out there. It's a new offense. It's a new team. I'm the leader of this team. I got to be out there. And so definitely admirable for him to do that. But I feel like in preseason camp, it's been different in that now he's fully healthy. Now the timing's there for him. And being out there in the spring kind of paid off for him. So if there's any rustiness, we'll see. But I think maybe just the biggest thing we've seen career-wise is, can he connect on that deep ball consistently, and can that timing be there?
Carter, know that place better than anybody. The facilities, the support, the fan base. We saw Jimbo get into it with Notre Dame a little bit a couple years ago after hauling in a big recruiting class. All the ingredients are there for this place to be an absolute powerhouse. What, from your vantage point, has been missing, and can Mike Elko fix whatever that missing link has been?
Yeah, you could point to a whole bunch of things. I think one thing's probably alignment from a university standpoint. There's been a lot of ADs. There's been a lot of presidents here over the last 20 years. Jimbo Fisher, what went wrong with him is just kind of the failure to adapt and the failure to, make the right hires. When Mike Elko left, when his strength coach left, when his offensive line coach left, he's replacing him with Steve Adazio. He's keeping certain guys on staff that shouldn't be there, right? And offensively, we saw just sort of how things became so seemingly difficult for the quarterback, to where they're having to process way too much and not really playing to the strengths of the offense. I think was kind of a problem, and certainly the discipline and the accountability in the program, I think was off. I mean, if you spoke to Mike Elko about just what he had to do when he took over this roster, they were in peril. Like everybody was in the transfer portal or had a foot out the door, and all the players were showing up late to meetings. And it's a voluntary workout. Well, that doesn't mean that means I don't have to go, right? So that was the main issue with this program over the last couple of years, is sort of staying with the times and keeping the important things important. And I think what Mike Elko's done a good job is went out and hired Tommy Moffitt, the strength coach at the former strength coach at LSU, and kind of bringing that importance back to the program when it comes to showing up on time and holding guys accountable. You hear it a lot with new regimes, with new strength coaches. It becomes kind of a cliche, but it really was the case with this program, where you just saw the chaos of every offseason and all the off the field distractions with Jimbo going after Nick Saban and all these things. So I think that what Mike Elko's prided himself in this offseason is kind of being a boring offseason, kind of being a out of the news offseason. I think that's the way he wants it. And I think that, I talk about alignment. They just brought in a new president, Mark Welsh. They just brought in a new AD, Trev Alberts. It's hard to have alignment in college athletics these days, but A&M's certainly been one of the worst from that standpoint. over the last 20 years. So that will be important. And Mike Elko kind of continuing that trend of, staying out of the news, I think would be good for this program.
What if you're a Notre Dame fan coming down to this game, or a media member like myself? It's my first time in College Station. Like, can you explain Kyle Field to somebody who's never been there? I'm going to be writing about just like how loud is Kyle Field this week. I'm working on a story with Sam Kahn, who and just like the renovation in 2015. You were there as a student, I think, when that was finishing. Can you explain how loud that place can get when it's Alabama or somebody like Notre Dame coming in for a night game?
Yeah, loud. I don't know if it is quite LSU. I don't know if it's quite Georgia, but top 5, top 10, definitely there from a noise standpoint. This may not affect the Notre Dame team as much, but I think what will stand out to Notre Dame fans is just sort of the traditions and the uniqueness of the crowd, from the yells that the students do to the students standing the whole game. And that kind of atmosphere is definitely different than what you get in typical college football. I think, A&M traditionally, when you go back to the R.C. Slocum days, kind of prided itself on defense and kind of, being loud on third down and that sort of thing. And so I think I'm really fascinated to just see the helmet communicators. And, we were watching Florida State, Georgia Tech last week, and Haynes King couldn't hear in Ireland.
Yeah, when you hear this,
yeah.
like the hands over the helmet to try to get the speaker close. That was the first thing I thought of. Was like, what is Riley Leonard going to look like on Saturday night?
Yes. Again, yeah, Ireland. If that's a crazy crowd, I can't imagine 105,000 in Kyle Field. I mean, a night game, first-year coach. I really think this has got the chance to be one of the louder crowds that we've seen in Kyle Field. It's one of those things you can't quite explain. One thing that you guys will have to prepare for, the press box at Kyle Field, I don't know who designed or built it, but it was not quite done right in the standpoint of when they're waving the towels pregame and when they do the Aggie war hymn, which you guys will probably learn about when you see it, but the press box will shake and it'll feel like someone's tugging beneath it, and it feels like you're about to fall to your death a little bit. So, that's something to watch for as you guys are, 100 million feet high up in the press box. So, may bring a parachute if you guys want to. But no, the war hymn's really cool because, the fans sway back and forth, and it's kind of a cool visual. So I think what the sentiment you hear from a lot of opposing fan bases, when you think of Texas A&M, I don't think you think of Ohio State, Michigan, LSU, Georgia, but the opposing fan bases that do come to Kyle Field, I think they think, man, this place is as impressive as any other place we've been to. And so I think Notre Dame fans will be blown away just by the tradition, the noise, the uniqueness of the whole atmosphere.
Penn State's press box would shake when I was a student there. I don't know if it's still like that now, but I found it to be fun when I was 22. I don't think I'll find it to be as fun when I'm 35 and fearing for my life. In that same vein, though, Carter, first time for both of us in College Station, and I'm sure for a lot of Notre Dame fans, where's the places to go to eat, to drink, to listen to live music, where to go on game day when they come into town for the game?
Yeah, the big place at Texas A&M, if you want to ever get a drink of alcohol at A&M, you can only go to one place pretty much. It's Northgate, north side of campus. There are a million bars there, a million restaurants there, but it's all packed into one small area. So it will be crazy. There will be a ton of people there, so you may want to get there early. But the cool thing about it is it's a 15-minute walk to the stadium, and you can kind of walk through the whole campus and see the whole thing. There's the Memorial Student Center across from Kyle Field, a place where, it's going to be hot. If you want to go to air conditioning, you can hang out there, watch some games. and then right outside Kyle Field, I'm not good with my directions, so I couldn't tell you north, south, east, west. One of the sides is kind of the main tailgate area, and they've really put a lot into that. 6 years ago, it was one of the worst tailgate scenes that I've seen, just because it was so uneven. It was mud everywhere. You'd have to get a new pair of shoes every time you went over there. But they really invested in that area. Kind of, I don't know how, but they made the grass where it's all even, and it's a pretty cool site. They've got a bunch of, altars, I guess you call it, where they have live music sometimes, and it's a really lively scene, and one of the better ones now in college football that you'll find. So the Aggie Park, and again, couldn't tell you north, south, east, west, but if you see it, you'll know it.
All right, kind of wrapping up more towards the game itself. I won't ask you for a prediction, but like A&M wins if, Notre Dame wins if. Like, what would be the keys to sway it one way or the other?
I think A&M wins if Notre Dame's offensive line is as questionable as we kind of wonder, right? And A&M's defensive line is as good as we think. I think back to the A&M Arizona State game 7 or 8 years ago, where it was it seemed like an evenly matched game, and then all of a sudden Deshaun Hall has 4 sacks, and it's like, oh wow, this defensive line is really dang good. I mean, it could be one of those games where Nick Scorton has 3 sacks, Shamar Stewart has a sack, Shamar Turner has a sack, and then all of a sudden it's like it doesn't really matter what else happens because they're so disruptive. And certainly A&M's skill positions, I think, is a big weakness. The offense is the question. If they're a little bit better than anticipated, certainly, could be a 1st to 20 wins kind of game. Notre Dame, I think they win if, A&M just can't get anything going offensively, right? I think Connor Wigman, we've talked about him. I think he has the potential to be a really dang good quarterback, but you look at the weapons he has around him. No receiver on his team has had 700 yards at a Power 4 school in a season. None of his running backs have had 600 yards in a season. None of his tight ends have had 400 yards in a season. So does he have an elite option to go to? And then when you're going against a secondary as good as Notre Dame's, going up against Howard Cross and this defensive line, can you put up 20 points? So Notre Dame wins if they just completely shut down this A&M offense.
Get you out of here on this, Carter. Guest picker prediction. I can't think of anyone other than Johnny Football, but my A&M knowledge is not exactly yours. So who do you think it should be?
As I was just saying, as the father of an 11-year-old boy, I have some strong opinions on who it should be. I'll see if Carter picks up on that.
Yes, I know you're probably saying Dude Perfect should be.
Yes.
Yep. Maybe. I have heard Johnny Manziel will be in town, but he's been in town a lot the last couple of years. Just got a bar on Northgate, the Johnny Manziel Money Bar. Maybe that's a spot that Notre Dame fans.
We got to go there, yeah. We should have done a live show there.
Yeah, exactly. You see some history there, right? But I'm going to guess Johnny Football. Definitely the biggest celebrity. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Dude Perfect might have surpassed his celebrity, at least among, 10 and 11-year-olds and kids. I mean, it's funny. Yeah. 10-year-olds these days, they don't know who Johnny Manziel is. They're just like, who's that? But Dude Perfect. Yeah. Every household knows who that is. So, but I'm going to guess Johnny Football.
I hope NFL Network newest analyst Manti Te'o comes, and we'll have all 3 top Heisman vote getters from 2012 in one place: Johnny Football, Manti Te'o, and Colin Klein.
That would be an incredible scene. That's great video. So, all right. Well, Carter, thanks for taking some time to join us here on the Independent. We'll see you up in the press box on Saturday night with a parachute in hand, and it sounds like binoculars also would be a good thing to have. So until Saturday, Carter, thanks for joining us here on the Independent.
I think a fun story coming 360 out of the team this year, and it's kind of playing on a couple different things. Hey, it's always good to have championship pedigree in the locker room. Right now, we've got a couple guys in the locker room that won a national championship in lacrosse. Faison, and now Tyler Buckner. I think it's hilarious and kind of a cool story that Tyler's back on the team. I'd be curious what role you see him playing. Do you think he'll actually get any playing time this year at wide receiver? Do you think they'll throw any gimmick plays in there with him? It's kind of a really interesting story with him coming full circle back to the team.
I gotta be honest, that's the first time I've heard that name since he wrote that essay saying he was coming back. I haven't heard his name from anyone's mouth at practice. I mean, maybe as a gimmick play, like again, he was a big, highly recruited,
like a fake
right?
or something like that.
But I mean, he would have been a great receiver on last year's team by the end of the season.
Yeah, I think he might have started last year at receiver. I mean, the depth of receiver, you go out to practice and you watch the receivers go through drills, and Cam Williams, who's from the Chicago Burbs, who was like a 5-star prospect, freshman, is like he's the 11th receiver. They have not had that level of like quality depth, and I'm not like Cam Williams is not ready to play, but like as a developmental guy, like man, that's a nice guy to develop. That makes me think that Tyler Buckner will not have a shot for any real reps this season. Marcus Freeman was asked about it, I think, last week, and it's just like, because it's a really cool human interest story about coming back to Notre Dame and graduating from Notre Dame, and sort of like maybe realizing that one sport that you thought was going to take you somewhere didn't, and it took you away, and like you've come back to find something else. Like that part of the Tyler Buckner story is great, and I hope to sit down with him sometime to write it. But in terms of like the actual box score element with Notre Dame this fall, I have a hard time seeing like a spot for him to actually get reps.
Maybe the NIU or the
Yeah.
Our Army later in the year.
Given all the talk about the new receivers, new OC, we all know historically Notre Dame's run heavy offense. They like to run up, win in the trenches.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys see a new style Notre Dame offense, kind of big picture for this season? Because you'll watch it in the Big 12 and they throw the ball all over the place and whatever. So I'm just curious if Denbrock is going to bring any sort of new scheme that we'll see, or is it kind of going to maybe be a little different, given that it's Notre Dame and historically they just win in the trenches, run the ball.
So when Denbrock came back, we sort of asked him about like how have you evolved as a coordinator, and he said like his second time around at Notre Dame, he was much more like the DNA of this place is run the ball. We have to do that, and he had like some shade for Brian Kelly about like sometimes the head coach needs like 2 or 3 years to figure that out himself. But when he came back, he said, we asked him about sort of not that specifically, but just sort of about how he saw offense. He's like, I got to a point where like banging your head against the wall to establish the run is just banging your head against the wall. And he wants to spread you out horizontally to pass it. The problem with that, or the opportunity with it, it depends on how you've recruited the position, is like you need a wide receiver room that can actually help you do that. Like you can't have Javon McKinley and Ben Skoranek be your 2 number 1 receivers and like air it out. Last year with that room, you couldn't air anything out. So I think that if they can have receiver rooms like they have now, then you're going to be much more open to doing that. It's when Mitchell Evans leaves after this year, do they have another like NFL like stud, surefire tight end? Probably. I like Cooper Flanagan a lot, but like in the past, like you'd have Mayer and Evans, or you'd have like multiples of those guys. So I think even that lent itself to like being more like bully ball in the box. But I know Denbrock is open to it and wants to go that way. It's just you got to have the roster to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at LSU's receiver room, not just last year, but in years past. I mean, it made life very easy for Jaden Daniels, not taking anything away from him. So I don't think you'll see him airing it out at that rate. And LSU had a terrible defense last year as well. I think Notre Dame will rely on the run more just because they know they've got a defense, at least in a game like this one, that can get them through it. But I do expect them to spread it out a little bit more. They don't have the offense line they've had in years past. They have much better receivers than they've had in years past. And they've got a quarterback who's proven he can do it with his legs, and at least in 2022, when he was fully healthy, had a decent enough deep ball where I think they're going to try to take advantage of that.
Yeah, where you spoke about the tight end, you think he's going to be staying back, helping the offensive line out more, particularly this Saturday. And tied to that, which of the running backs on third down and long is better suited to block for blitzes?
That's a good question. I would say, the tight ends, you're going to have to chip a lot more on Saturday night. The problem is, like, because it's so loud, the tight end's not going to be able to hear the snap of the ball. So he might be a beat late getting off the line of scrimmage. But I think you have to help out Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner, in varying degrees. The back who's best blocking, I don't know that. It would have been Jabron Payne. He tore his ACL over the summer, so he's out for the year. So it's, ideally it's Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price because those are the two most talented guys. Devin Ford stuck around, moved to safety, moved back to running back. He's the coaching staff loves him. Can he fill that role where the fact that your passing is not a tell? Maybe. But I think in an ideal world, it's Love or Price. I'm just not sure which one is probably best suited to do that.
I would guess Love just based on his build, but I haven't heard anything specific that would support that. But it makes you appreciate a guy like Kyron Williams, who I think back to that Clemson game. Obviously, the guy is a tremendous running back and is doing it at the NFL now. But I thought what really separated him and allowed him to break out that second year in 2020 was his ability to block and his willingness and kind of the way he loved to block. I thought was very, very crucial. And they're going to need someone to do that in that backfield this year.
Now he's going to be returning punts this year.
I know. Kicks or punts?
Anything they can get the ball in his hands, basically.
Speed wasn't his thing, too. Like, not that he's slow, but like he was not like a burn by you back. But I did see that.
Not to beat a dead horse in the wide receiver conversation, but I'd like to. There was an ACC coach just last year that I believe said he could time Notre Dame's wide receivers with a sundial. If I remember that quote correctly. What happened less than 12 months? Obviously there's some transfer portal stuff and there's players that come in, but it seems to be a fairly large turnaround for not a single serving position like quarterback. What happened? Why are these expectations so high? What changed?
Well, I was going to say, like, I think the expectations for the receiver room have gone from like bottom of the barrel to like pretty good. It's not like Will Fuller and Michael Floyd. But I think that you bring in Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, Jaden Harrison. Last year alone, they had over 200 catches. Over like 130 catches, 2,000 yards, 13 touchdowns. Like guys who've done it. Like Notre Dame was hoping Tobias Merriweather was going to do it. They were hoping Rico Flores was going to do it. Now you have guys who have done it. So you fix a recruiting mistake there by having old guys in the room. And then among the younger talent, they've sort of winnowed out the guys who couldn't. I think that if you ask the coaching staff who's the best receiver on the team, Jaden Greathouse is the guy. I think Bo Collins is right there too. But like Jaden Greathouse, you've got for at least 2 more years, maybe 3. So I think they had some recruiting misses. They were banking on guys who had never done it in college games to produce in college games. That blew up in their face. Now they bring in 3 guys who have done it, and they have Jaden Thomas is back as well. He's somebody who's produced. He's healthy. And the entire room won't collapse when one person strains their hamstring, which is sort of what happened last season. So to actually have quality depth there that's a big change.
Yeah, I think the investment in the portal, bringing in those 3 proven guys who've on their own done more than anyone on this roster has done in quite some time. I think Greathouse, if he's healthy, has a lot of potential. And Jordan Faison ended up probably being, he won the bowl game MVP, I believe, but he ended up being probably their best and most reliable receiver at the end last year. He was a freshman walk-on. Like, now he's in a role where he's still really good and still outperformed his non-recruiting ranking, but you're not counting on him to be the bread and butter of your wide receiver core. And I think they're just much deeper. Even Chancey Stuckey got fired. I know he coached last year's group, but the class he brought in to end up signing, I think, at least recruiting-wise, is much better than what they'd had in years past and gives them some depth and some cushion there that they did not have at all last year. By the way, is that quote anonymous, or did someone like go up at a podium and say that? The ACC coach? Okay.
Of course.
Yeah. Tell me. They told you that. Yeah. All right, now I'm thinking of your network.
What about Eli Reardon? Talking about tight ends. What do you guys see?
I think that Cooper Flanagan and Eli Reardon maybe are a little bit closer in sort of how the coaches see them. but I think both are like your prototypical Notre Dame tight ends. So I would say it's Mitchell Evans 1 when he gets fully back health, but I think Brereton and Cooper Flanagan probably are closer together. I don't like when you look at Eli Rader, you're like, holy crap, this is like slightly shorter version of Kyle Rudolph. But I think him playing through multiple ACLs is not an uncomplicated situation. And I think Flanagan, when you talk to last year's coaching staff, he would ask like, who are the guys on offense you think could be guys down the road? You hear Flanagan, you hear Ashton Craig, and you hear Charles Jagasaw, the left tackle who got hurt. So, but Flanagan would be on the list of guys who I think by the end of the year you'd be like, okay, I really like what Notre Dame has in him for the long haul.
Yeah, I'm with P. I mean, they were an aura in the second team depth chart this week. I think Flanagan's long-term potential is really, really high, and I like Raritan, but coming off the multiple injuries he's had, I know that's kind of the job hazards playing that position, and he'll be out there, but I do wonder what he'll be able to give them this year.
Do you think it's still optimal for Notre Dame to stay independent, or are there some benefits?
Yes. I just have to change our name.
Yeah, we've already rebranded our podcast once. Yeah, the Big Ten just doesn't really have a ring or anything like that for a podcast name. I just like Notre Dame can afford it now. I think one of Swarbrick's sort of outgoing achievements was the NBC deal with Peacock. I think Matt's heard from Bavacqua that it's between the SEC and the Big Ten in terms of what the payout is, and that was always not always, but I think in the last few years being independent, it wasn't just like a scheduling issue or a playoff issue; it was like a balancing the budget issue. And Notre Dame can balance some budgets with their NBC deal. So I think independence is, as long as you can fill out a schedule, you definitely keep going with it.
Agree wholeheartedly. I would have my eye on the ACC right now, just as far as what happens to it, because if that thing were to collapse and these lawsuits between Florida State, Clemson, and who knows what else is down the pipe come, you need to keep your options open for your Olympic sports, and that could lead to some complicated conversations. But right now, Jack Swarbrick made this rule up. Like, he was one of 4 people who developed the 12-team playoff that has Notre Dame as a part of it. And I think all of us, we're going to learn a lot more about how this system works in real time, because you look at the preseason rankings. I think Utah at 13 is the highest ranked Big 12 team. They would be a 3 or 4 seed. So let's say hypothetically Notre Dame goes undefeated. They're a 5 seed. They're probably hosting a group of 5 team in the first round. So instead of a conference championship game, they're playing a team that they're going to beat at home. And then in the next round, they're playing on the road at a 3 or 4 seed that might be ranked outside of the top 10.
Neutral site, though.
Oh, neutral site. I'm sorry. Yes. That might be ranked outside of the top 10. I mean, Florida State was the highest ranked ACC team coming into the year. Maybe they still will be, but they don't look unbeatable right now, and Notre Dame's going to see them for themselves in November. Utah, obviously a good team, but not a top 10 preseason team. But whoever wins those 2 leagues are going to have the 3 and 4 seeds. And so you look at Notre Dame's situation. I know they don't get that bye, but they get conference championship weekend off, which I think a lot of playoff teams are going to want to have off, because they're going to be, it's just one more game and one more wear and tear on your body against a good opponent. And again, we'll learn more as this happens. But I think as you get to the stretch road of this season, the first time we have that 12-team playoff, there are going to be some decisions to be made, I think, for a lot of these teams when it gets to conference championship weekend. And I think Notre Dame is in a very ideal position to take advantage of that. Also, I cut you off. I don't know if you had another part of that. Okay.
I know the offensive line is young. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe our linebackers pretty young too, outside of Kaiser. Max Bola, I think, was promoted right from the GA to linebackers coach. He's a young guy too, right? Kind of unproven. From perspective, how do you think that plays with John this year? That run?
I mean, Bola is really popular with the younger linebackers. He's really popular with the media too, because he just is like, oozes like football guy when he comes in. If he was not promoted, I think he would be the linebackers coach of the defensive coordinator at Boston College right now. I think he was on his way out if he was not on his way up at Notre Dame. Yeah, he's from I don't know what Jonathan Smith at Michigan State, what his defensive coordinator situation was, but I know Bill O'Brien, he played with him.
Joe Rossi from Minnesota. Because Spray took over at Oregon State and didn't coach the Sun Bowl.
Yeah, so Bill O'Brien, the BC head coach, coached Bulla with the Texans when he was in the pros, so that's the connection there. But yeah, it's the linebacker room is curious to me. They're incredibly high in Kingston Viliama-Asa. They have been from recruiting on to when he showed up, and every step of the way, he's exactly what they think he is. I talked to Jack Kaiser about him in the summer, and it's like he picks things up so quickly that I think he'll be good. Like he has to do it on the field, but all signs point to that being a hit. I know they like Drake Bowen a lot. I don't think they'll take Jack Kaiser off the field much this season because he kind of can stitch everything together. And when you're playing nickel, you only have two linebackers. Jack Kaiser's out there; he can tell the other one exactly what to do. And the other guy is a nickel back who, Jordan Clark or Rod Hurd, who they've been around forever. So I think Bulla will be good long term. And it's like you've got Al Golden, who's really a linebackers coach, and Marcus Freeman, who's really a linebackers coach. So the linebackers, I don't think they get away with anything. Between those three guys coaching them.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback off Pete. I mean, Golden was coaching linebackers before, and Freeman's a linebacker himself. Coaching wise, I'm not worried about position group. It is a little young and thin right now, but they like Osbury, they like Snead, they like Bowen. I think Kingston Viliama, I'm going to mispronounce
KVA.
KVA, yeah, we're going to get MTA. Myron talking about Masa. Coaching with Brian Kelly now at LSU. If there's a freshman who's going to break out on this defense, it's going to be him. True freshman.
Oh, I think good college player. I think that's the ceiling. Like I think he's just somebody who's finally reliable. There was a moment in the offseason where he actually addressed the team to talk about why it's important, why he's back. That's not something I ever would have conceived of him doing in his first, second, or third year. So I think that a reliable guy in the defense, that defensive line, the two stars are the interior guys. You just need your edge guys to be good. And I think Botello, RJ Oben, they're good. I think Boubacar Chari could be great down the road, maybe by the end of this year. Bryce Young could be great. Probably not this year, but in the future. So I think if you can just get good, reliable Botello, I think Notre Dame would sign up for that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, everything I've gathered from this offseason is the guy seems to have that proverbial senior light switch click on. And I think I've said on this podcast before, that kind of happened with Chase Claypool. And obviously he had a tremendous final 2 years in Notre Dame. I'm not saying Jordan Botello is going to be that good, but it was a guy who I think candidly had some maturity issues and couldn't always be counted upon. And it seems like that's been kind of worked out and coached out of him. And they expect him to be a good football player this year.
With going back to receivers, we don't want to get too far from that conversation. My question is about Mike Brown. He was brought in. It was kind of an odd situation. You already mentioned how Marcus Freeman talked about bringing the coaching staff back, and then a day later, Stuckey's gone, and they bring in Brown, highly regarded, good at development. But after a rough recruiting cycle this year, and the fact that they're losing 4 or 5 receivers out of the room, 9 receivers at least, it feels like we could be heading down road for Groundhog Day. And I'm wondering if there's confidence that given a full cycle that Brown can recruit on a level more appropriate for Notre Dame. If he, and you said before, Pete, that it's recruiting receiver, finding transfers in the receiver portal, a lot easier than some other positions. Yeah. But how much can you count on bringing in 3 dudes each year? I feel like that's a lot of expectations.
Yeah, you can count on bringing 1 guy every year. Right. I think that's really realistic. Even when the COVID waivers go away after this year, and you're not going to be able to get these 6-year seniors, I think you'll be able to find receivers to make the move to Notre Dame. But you can't do 3 every year. The freshman class is good. I think the sophomore class is good. I totally agree with you. The recruiting class they're putting together right now is not. They've had some missteps, some bad evals along the way. Derek Meadows was a big-time guy that they were leading for early in the process, and that fell apart at the end when he committed to LSU. I do know that early, about a year ago, like I got together with Stuckey and we were talking about recruiting. Is like, man, the 2025 board is not good. It was a year where they expected to struggle at receiver and recruiting, maybe not to the level that they actually have. But there wasn't like an obvious Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert type. And we'll see what they do at the end. Like Logan Saldate, they like a lot, right? He wasn't in the class at this time last year. They flipped him from Oregon State at the very end. So they're going to have to really scout and then flip one, if not two people in this class, I think, to have a good enough recruiting class. But I think the way that the class has sort of been organized, you sort of sense the pacing of the offers and the visits and like how Notre Dame feels about guys. This one is just, I'm with you, it just has felt a little bit off.
I do think long term, this season's going to dictate that one way or another. I'm
Yeah,
kind of
agree with
surprised
that
they've
too.
recruited as well as they have with how poor they've been receiver wise in recent years. And I think having Mike Denbrock have probably a more open and traditional offense than what they're used to having. If that's a success and if they make a playoff run, I imagine there will be benefits for that down the road.
Yeah, you do wonder, like, I think for the most part, like Notre Dame classes don't swing wildly with season results the way that they do at a lot of their programs. But in 2012, like that recruiting class that had Jalen Smith, McGlinchey, Fuller, Torian Folston. I know Max Redfield didn't work out, but he was a big time recruit who committed late. Greg Bryant didn't work out, big time recruit committed late. That if Notre Dame is that good, I think that they will turn some heads of people, and like Derek Meadows might be one of them. But if this season goes as well as Notre Dame thinks it can, it might be one of those few seasons that like people are making a football decision to come to Notre Dame opposed to like an everything else decision. When you can put those two things together, it can be pretty powerful.
I will add, I know I talked about the playoff schedule a little bit earlier. If Notre Dame's playing into January, there's going to be a lot of coaching movement that already happened everywhere else. And there's going to be a lot of recruits up for grabs and a lot of people transferring. And I'm just not sure all of us, we, the media, the coaching staffs, everyone, have fully grasped just how chaotic that's going to be. Because, I mean, if you're a group of 5 head coach, you've got a playoff caliber team, are you already looking at your next big job? Kind of like we see with March Madness, the minute a Cinderella loses, they got a new job the next day. And, oh, look, he had 1 foot out the door. That's why they lost. I want to see what the recruiting impacts of that. And again, if Notre Dame has a deep playoff run this year, they're going to be stabilized in a way that a lot of programs aren't.
Talking about a lot of ifs here. Your personal opinions. You've been doing this almost a quarter century, if I remember right.
One of us.
You do remember right.
For those of you on video.
Yeah.
You've been doing this your 14th season now? Anyway, Matt's
Yeah, 14th. Yeah. Oh, you're good.
The schedule from the outside looking in seems to be one of the most manageable, shall we say, in the modern history of Notre Dame. With that being said, with all of the other items that you touched on, what's your floor for this team? What's your ceiling, and what are your realistic expectations?
The schedule's terrible. Like I think we need to call a spade a spade. If they beat A&M, they should go undefeated. They're the only power program in the country playing 4 group of 5 teams this year, and 2 of them are military academies. And Florida State, we'll see what happens, but they don't look like world beaters after week 1 as well. I mean, they play 3 true road games, only 2 of which are out of state, the first game and the last game. They need to win this game, because if they win this one, it'll be smooth sailing the rest of the way. But it's one of those years where 10-2 might not get you in. I know it's a TV show and it's a big brand, but this schedule, and I know Miami was supposed to be on it this year. Yes. I forget what happened with the ACC where they moved that game to next year. And Miami should be pretty good really good this year.
They had like some conflict where I think the Florida game, they wanted to play Florida or Notre Dame, but not both.
Okay.
So the ACC let them get out of it.
Well, that ceiling 12-0, deep playoff run. I'm not going to say they're going to the national championship, just because when you look at that offensive line on week 1, it's hard to picture where they are now and where they have to be to do that at the end of January. But I think they are capable of winning 2, maybe 3 playoff games, which would get you to the semis or national championship if everything went right and if Riley Leonard stayed healthy. Floor, I can't see them losing more than 2 games of the schedule unless Riley Leonard gets hurt. So I think this season is set up to be a huge stepping stone for Marcus Freeman one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree. Floor is 10-2, barring like the catastrophic type injuries. The schedule is terrible. it's not manageable. It's terrible. I'll be interested to sort of see, like, if Notre Dame is good, it's not going to matter who they're playing because people will come out for it. But yeah, but the weakness in the schedule this year, it's a really bad year to go 10-2, especially if you lose the first one, and the other SEC schools that also finished 10-2, maybe they beat A&M or they beat somebody who beat A&M, and they say like, hey, we did this, they didn't. Like you might lose that argument if you're Notre Dame. Ceiling 12-0. I think 2 playoff wins would be great. A third puts you in the national championship game. But I think to me, I think that they will go 11-1. They'll make the playoff, and they probably will host. But as Matt talked about a minute ago, like if you go 12-0, then you're the 5 seed. You're hosting a group of 5 team. You win that game. You play neutral site against the ACC or the Big 12 champion, and in the quarterfinals, you probably win that game. And then you take your chances with Georgia, Ohio State, teams like that. I really want to see Notre Dame in that game. It's like, I know they haven't won that game in a long, long time, but I want to see Notre Dame play that game because you can't win it unless you play it. And so those are the most fun games for me to cover, is like when you get to see Notre Dame go to Georgia or play Alabama or play Clemson in the playoff. They've gone the way that they've gone, but you got to keep knocking on that door. And I feel like this is a team built to like go through the door. They just need to get to the opportunity.
I will say, at least on paper at the outset of the season, I really think it's just Georgia and Ohio State and everyone else. Now, I'm not saying it's going to play out that way, but I don't see any other team where you get that wide-eyed look that Notre Dame will get years ago when they would play Alabama or Clemson. And again, depth's really going to matter. And at least on defense, this is a really deep team. And I think when you get to game 14, game 15, deep in the playoffs, that's going to matter. And these college coaches, these college staff, especially in the NIL and portal era, have never had to keep their players' interest for that long. It's easier to do that when you're playing for a championship, but that's still a tall ask, and it's the first time any of these staffs are asking it. So I'll be curious to see how that plays out.
When you talk about the depth on defense, if you go back when Julian Love got hurt against Clemson in the playoff game, how much of a better chance could this team have had against Trevor Lawrence to at least keep that game close?
Much better.
Yeah, much, much better. I mean, that would all fell apart as soon as you lost one player. And somebody asked about linebackers. If Jack Kaiser got hurt, they might be in some trouble there, or especially early before those younger guys get up to speed. But the secondary, I don't think a position had a better training camp than Notre Dame secondary. Not only was Benjamin Morrison healthy, but you had a Don Schuler beating out a really good grad transfer from Northwestern and Rod Hurd. You had Christian Gray beating out Jaden Mickey, which I think is a real positive. You had 2 freshman corners who, Carson Hobbs, the staff likes them as hits. So I feel like they're much better off. That defensive line is in good shape. Like, how many years would they lose a player like Gabe Rubio? And I was like, well, now you're playing like a freshman walk-on. Like, they actually have guys to run out there now. So with the exception of inside linebacker with Jack Kaiser, it's an incredibly deep defense.
You mentioned if they win this weekend, running the table. Obviously, until you put the ball down and you play, you never really know how good the teams are. But the preseason rankings, even before Charles Jagasaw went down, had the Irish in the top 10. You got A&M at I think around 20 or so. Yet all the betting lines, even going back a month, have A&M as the favorites. What are we missing? Is it just the effect of Kyle Field? Is it something different? You've got a program like Notre Dame who has been pretty well established for a while, gone toe-to-toe with Ohio State the last few years. A&M's been kind of a mess, and now they're bringing in Elko, which should lift them up a little bit. But from a prognosticator standpoint from Vegas, like what are we missing that they're seeing?
If I had a good answer for that, I'd be in Vegas right now, and I wouldn't be doing this podcast. I would also say this past week and in week 0, there were 4 games with 4 double-digit spreads, and all 4 underdogs covered. One of them outright winning, so that's a good sign if you're Notre Dame. But I think there is an SEC or and boogeyman kind of aspect to it. Not necessarily Vegas, but this happened, 2 weeks ago? Manti Te'o goes on Good Morning Football and talks about basically how they were intimidated by Alabama running out of the tunnel. Like, they can't be that way anymore. And I know those were two different teams in a different era, but like, I feel like even with Saban gone, the SEC is still like living off that rep a little bit. And you can't let the environment or the opponent or the name beat you before it gets there. I can't speak specifically to why the line is the way it is. I mean, we were all surprised Notre Dame was favored over undefeated USC last year, and look how that turned out. Pretty good for Notre Dame. So same thing. I remember when they lost to Michigan in a blowout. I think Michigan was favored that game, and Michigan was not very good that year. Again, I don't know if they knew the forecast would be what it would be, but I am a little bit surprised by the line, especially as it keeps. I think it's up to 3 now. I'm surprised Texas A&M's 3-point favorite, and I'd be surprised if Notre Dame was more than a 3-point favorite. I don't think this game's going to go beyond 2017, 17-14, unless it's overtime and you win by a touchdown.
Yeah, I agree. I think winning on the road is hard. It's like people say it all the time, but it's true. The last 3 top 10 opponents that have come to Kyle Field have all lost to A&M, and those have not been necessarily good A&M teams. So, and I think Notre Dame probably gets dinged, maybe rightly so. Like, Notre Dame doesn't win this game a whole lot. They don't go on the road and beat ranked teams a lot. So when they do, sometimes it's Michigan State,
Duke.
It's not Clemson. It's not Georgia. A&M I feel like is sort of in between. Like they're definitely not Clemson or Georgia, but like they're not Michigan State either. So this is a game Notre Dame absolutely can get. But with the offensive line the way it is, I do sort of get why they are underdogs. Even if they played at the end of the year, I think Notre Dame is, or on a neutral side, I think Notre Dame is a better team.
What A&M guys are you most concerned about?
Nick Gordon for sure.
Shamar Turner. Yeah, pretty much the whole defensive line.
Yeah, Nick Gordon, he'll be, I don't know if they do sort of field boundary, if he'll match up with Anthony Knapp more or with Emil Wagner more, but he transferred to from Purdue to A&M. He's from College Station, led the Big Ten in sacks last year at Purdue. So I think that says something because people aren't throwing the ball on Purdue a whole lot because they're just running out the clock. So it's that one concerns me a lot. I'm blanking on Bussy's first. Yeah, Bussy is a freshman.
I wrote it down here earlier.
First name I'm blanking.
Terry
Bussy.
Reverse Terry.
A freshman, like all-purpose back type guy. Jet sweeps. Maybe it'll be punt return. Maybe it'll be kick return. Just a speed player that concerns me a little bit just from the standpoint, like if you can get a young linebacker to like not know which direction to go and play a little bit more east-west, maybe his speed catches Notre Dame off guard for a gadget play. That's sort of a deeper cut guy that I'd be concerned about, but Nick Gordon for sure is he's big time, so that's going to be a huge challenge for Notre Dame.
Bossy would worry me. It's his first college game. We don't know what position he's going to play. They put him as kick returner on the depth chart, but everything you've heard out of A&M is he was recruited as a corner, but he's catching passes now as a receiver. And when you look at the difference in those games, the Clemson games, the Georgia games, it's usually that SEC speed, and I put that in air quotes. But when you've got a guy who's the number 1 recruited athlete in the country, that's a guy that would definitely be on my radar. I mean, defensive line is obvious. Those guys are proven, and Notre Dame's offensive line is not. But Bussy's a guy I would be worried about.
I've got a better chance of blowing one team out this Saturday. All 3 phases.
Ooh. If it was a blowout, that's a good question.
I don't say this because of personnel. Like, I don't think it's gonna be a blowout, so I haven't really thought it that deeply. But it's usually the home team, right? The road team shows up, like Notre Dame at Miami in 17, and they're shell shocked, and everything goes to hell.
USC at Notre Dame last year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. But if one were to blow it out, I would guess A&M. But even if it were a blowout, I just don't see them scoring a lot on Notre Dame's defense.
Yeah,
blowout would be 24-10 or something,
it's like my concern for Notre Dame. I think if Notre Dame could play it smart offensively, and you don't get that tipped pass at the line of scrimmage that squirts to a linebacker who then brings it in for a 30-yard pick six. Like, you're going to avoid that really fluky, catastrophic play. Like, I think Notre Dame will be able to play this smart enough to win it. And I don't think A&M is to the point where they would know how to win a game like that. I would think like A&M would almost need to have some kind of fluky touchdown or short field to win the game. Whereas I'm not sure I feel that way about Notre Dame. I think even with the offensive line the way that it is, because I don't think A&M's going to be able to score a whole lot. It's like it definitely feels more like a 1st to 20 kind of game than if it's a 1st to 20 kind of game. Almost by definition, nobody's getting blown out.
55 newcomers for A&M. I don't want to say they don't know how to win, but it's a group that together, like if they're in that close game, I do wonder how in sync they'll be.
That scenario you just described, though, is exactly what happened to Clemson last year.
Right.
RJ open, stripped it, they got it, touchdown. Duke was up the rest of the game.
Yeah, it was almost like it felt like South Florida 2011, right? Yeah. But like Dabo Swinney was living that nightmare. Those kinds of plays, it's kind of hard to sit there. You go through the scouting report and I think this is going to happen. I'm going to do a feature on this guy, and then just it's college football. It's hard to know what college kids are going to do. But to me if you can avoid that kind of play if you're Notre Dame, then man, I feel like they have a great chance to win the game on Saturday.
100 predictions and then wrap up.
Sure, go ahead.
I'll go Notre Dame 17-14, but I don't think it's actually going to be that close. I think it'll be like 17-7, and A&M
it's your prediction. You can
scores a cheap touchdown at the end. I think Notre Dame wins. I trust that staff. I trust Riley Leonard. I don't trust that offensive line, but I think they'll be good enough. And I just, short of something catastrophic happening, I just have a hard time seeing A&M putting a whole lot of points on the board. Mike Elko's a hell of a football coach, but it's his first game with a roster that is completely remade, and I have a hard time seeing A&M winning this one, short of Notre Dame having a complete meltdown, which they should be past by now. So I'll go Notre Dame 17-14. I did say if they win this one, they'll go 12-0. So 12-0. You said 11-1. So what's the one?
Yeah. Oh, God. I guess I'll be contrarian then. I think this will be the one.
Okay.
I think Notre Dame will go 11-1, but they'll be 0-1 to start. I think that there's I don't know, and I think it will be kind of like a 17-14, 17-13 kind of game, which obviously could go in the other direction. But I just think if of all the games on the schedule, this is the one that sets up worst for Notre Dame. New coach, game day, night game, Kyle Field, offensive line. Mike Denbrock's talked about how the offense is going to be a work in progress for a while. I think this is probably where they just don't have enough. They don't have the pieces put together yet on Saturday night at Texas A&M. But then I think they will put them together, because I think this defense and this offense, once it gets caught up, this has a chance to be a really special team. So I'll go A&M 17-13.
That's a cover.
And then 11-1 season.
Bet on the Aggies. Yeah. 3 points.
That's how the expectations have been raised around Notre Dame. You get booed for an 11-1 prediction.
There you go.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up there on this episode of The Independent. Thanks to Go Wang again for having us out at ESQ Clothing. Thanks to the audience for coming and ask some great questions tonight. And we will be back Saturday night / Sunday morning for our next episode of The Independent, recapping that I'm sure Matt will be right and I'll be wrong. What happens for
There's
Notre
a
Dame?
kiss of death for me.
Notre Dame, Texas A&M. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, guys.